Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the text message from Ethan. He glanced over at Mrs. Carter, still speaking with Tim, and then back at his phone. The choice was agonizing. He'd already handed the situation over to Mrs. Carter, trusted her to investigate. But Ethan's message seemed urgent, desperate even. Could this be the breakthrough he needed? What if Mrs. Carter missed something important, or worse? What if she wasn't as trustworthy as he had hoped? "Meet me by the lockers." Ethan's message flashed again, demanding attention. Jack clenched his fists. His instincts screamed at him to follow Ethan, to hear what he had uncovered. But part of him felt like running straight to Mrs. Carter and saying, "I've changed my mind. I want you to solve this." The investigation was her responsibility now, wasn't it? But something gnawed at him, the way Tim had acted earlier. The odd behavior he'd been displaying over the past few weeks. Something wasn't adding up. "Jack!" Mrs. Carter called, breaking him out of his thoughts. "I need you to stay put for a moment. Tim and I need to discuss what happened." Jack barely acknowledged her, already turning towards the door. The temptation to follow Ethan's lead was too strong. "Sorry, Mrs. Carter," Jack mumbled. "I need to check something. I'll be back soon." Without waiting for a response, he bolted down the hallway toward the lockers. The corridor was quiet, save for the echo of his footsteps. His breath quickened with each step. The mystery was growing. He could feel it. The truth was right there, just out of reach. But what could Ethan have discovered that Jack hadn't already figured out? As Jack neared the lockers, he spotted Ethan leaning against the metal doors, looking around nervously. His eyes darted to Jack as soon as he approached. "You're not going to believe this," Ethan whispered, pulling Jack closer. "I overheard something while I was in the bathroom. It's about Tim." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What? What about him?" Ethan's voice dropped even lower, as if he feared someone might be listening. "I overheard him talking to Mr. Grayson in the teacher's lounge. You know, the guy who's been acting weird lately? Well, Tim was he was asking him how to make a project disappear. He didn't say much, but it was enough." Jack's stomach twisted. "Mr. Grayson? But he's one of the teachers. What's he got to do with all of this?" Ethan shook his head, looking like he'd just stepped into something deeper than either of them expected. "That's not the worst part. I think Tim was planning this all along. The project was never his in the first place, Jack. He was just waiting for the right moment to snatch it." Jack's mind raced. Could it be true? Was Tim involved in something bigger? And why was Mr. Grayson involved in all of this? "I don't know, man," Jack said, his voice shaking. "This is getting out of hand." Ethan leaned in closer. "There's more, Jack. I found something at Tim's desk. A note. It was hidden in the bottom of his folder. It had a time and date on it. Today's date. The note said something about meeting in the back room and a final exchange." Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. "Meeting in the back room? What kind of exchange? What's going on?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's bigger than just a stolen project. And I have a bad feeling it has something to do with Tim S.'s sudden interest in your project." Jack's thoughts were racing. He had no idea what this meant, but he knew one thing for sure. It was more than just a school project. Something strange was happening, and it wasn't just about Tim. Before Jack could say anything more, a voice interrupted them. "What's going on here?" It was Mrs. Carter standing at the end of the hallway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Jack froze. What now? Had she heard everything? Was she going to believe him about what Ethan had just revealed? Or was he in even more trouble for not sticking to his promise? Ethan stepped forward. "We were just..." But Jack didn't wait for him to finish. He turned to Mrs. Carter and took a deep breath. "I think there's more to this than we realized," Jack said, his voice steady. "We need to look into Mr. Grayson, and we need to find out what Tim's really involved in. It's not just about the project anymore." Mrs. Carter's face softened for a moment, but she didn't seem convinced. "Jack, I understand that you're upset, but we need to follow the proper steps." "No, Mrs. Carter," Jack interrupted. "I've been thinking about it. You're not seeing the whole picture. If we don't act now, we might miss something important." Mrs. Carter hesitated, her gaze flicking between Jack and Ethan. For a moment, the hallway felt heavy with silence. Then, with a sigh, she nodded. "All right, Jack. We'll investigate further. But I need you to stay focused. This is bigger than just you and Tim. We'll follow the right steps, but I'll need your help. Are you in?" Jack nodded without hesitation. "I'm in. Let's find the truth." As the three of them walked toward the principal's office to make their next move, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking into something far darker than a missing school project. The question was, would they uncover the truth before it was too late? What do you think is really going on with Tim and Mr. Grayson? What will Jack and his friends discover next? Let us know your thoughts, and stay tuned for part 4 of the case of the missing project. You won't believe the shocking twists ahead.